I am unashamed. What about you?
So welcome back to Unashamed. We have one of our favorite guests.
No, we have my favorite.
Well, Jace's favorite. There's no doubt about it. Jace, you want to introduce our
I have come
guest?
a long way if you are calling me your favorite guest.
Babe,
I'm
glad I said that. I thought that was obvious. Babe, I do this. Do you like my little mathematical equation every time I've been introducing you? Do you know what it is?
What?
1 + 1 is 1.
Oh, yeah.
In Christ. I love it because the math
The new math.
is different from a kingdom perspective.
Well, I just remember the first time I ever came on your podcast, I've never seen you so nervous. So I'm glad to know that you settled in.
You make me nervous. That's a fact. But I think that's good. If you're not nervous about something, it doesn't matter. The only time I get nervous is when something really matters.
Well, because you're his ultimate fact checker. That's what that's
Well,
I call it accountability on steroids.
Exactly.
That part we need to. There's a little something called grace.
A little thing called grace.
Which is needed because Jace has a little something we call hyperbole that happens quite often on this podcast.
However, let's just go ahead and get this out of the way because I did something on the last podcast that I now have to confess because
You told quite the story about you,
I told
Missy.
the story and no one knew in our inner circle what happened. And so I just announced it to the world about our little trip to a little place called Mar-a-Lago. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right.
No, you got it.
And so I told her about that, babe, because I could not have been more proud in that moment as a public speaker. And my self-confession of my biggest weakness my whole first half of my life was actually publicly speaking. And I don't mean in front of an audience. I mean just anywhere. I was kind of a shy, keep it to yourself kind of guy. But that moment when you're standing on stage and we have all these kind of political gurus and different people of influence around us, and other people had received these influence awards, and one of them was I think it's the current Mississippi.
She's Attorney General Lynn Finch.
She's amazing.
She argued
I met
before
her.
the Supreme Court
Yeah.
for the Dobbs case and won.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, she received an award right before Missy, so she
Okay.
spoke before Missy. So
She's
now Missy
incredible.
gets up after her, and in between the president speaking, which happened all of a sudden, and Missy was at the end of her speech, but she was reading Acts 17, which is so, and I don't want to just say that chapter flippantly, because when you start thinking about what she was reading, how God created all people, gave them life, breath, and everything else, and put them at the exact time and the exact places where they should live so they would reach out for him and find him. I mean, just think about looking at the perspective of you being on this earth and being in these moments.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you can't make
But,
this
and
stuff
I'll
up.
say this too, Missy, because Jace really did a nice job honoring you being in that moment. And it's hard for you to talk about it because you're humbly receiving an award. But you think about it, Jace talked about this before the election, that at a Kamala Harris rally, a person shouted out, Jesus is Lord, and that person was told by Kamala Harris, you're at the wrong rally.
Go down the road to the smaller rally.
Exactly. So the idea then that the person who won the presidency is waiting in the wings as you're sharing Act 17 and is available to hear that and then thanks you for saying what you said. I mean, or at least acknowledges. I'm just saying that the idea is that obviously these are God ordained moments. And one of the things that inspires us is that we step up. Even we're all imperfect people, and of course Trump gets a lot of that because of his past. And I mean, he was just a Democrat a dozen years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and yet at the same time, it's the open of the possibility. It's the fact that the mom's event was there
Mm-hmm.
at Mar-a-Lago,
Well,
and you were there.
It's Moms for America, and they are a fantastic organization. But Kimberly Fletcher is her name. She never gave up. So, Zach, if you'll remember, in 2017, they asked me to speak at what they called a Mom's March in Omaha, Nebraska, and they rented out the huge civic center there. And Sarah Palin was there and Candy Carson, and we all each were given like 8-minute speeches that we could give. And I worked on it. Zach tweaked it for me. Like I wanted to hit all the controversies with truth, and wanted to make sure that I did it, not in a mean way. But boy, I mean, that speech was awesome, and no one heard it.
Yeah, there was very few people there.
No one came.
The best speech that no one heard.
Because the Moms for America were just getting started.
Yeah.
And Missy tells a funny story about being backstage. I guess I can tell that. And because it's like all the speakers were a little disappointed that there wasn't a bunch of people there. Now, look, you fast forward 7 years later, they're rolling. They were all there.
Yeah.
But she's talking here with Ben Carson's wife and Sarah Palin, and they were all like, well, you know what? Why are you here? And they were like, well, I heard you were going to be here. And it was like, they were all saying, well, it must be something big. Or
These are very well known.
Well,
right.
it got to Candy Carson because we looked at her because I said, I'm here because I saw that Sarah Palin was speaking. And Sarah Palin looked at Candy and she said, well, I'm here because you were going to speak. And Candy went, we all looked at Candy and she went, well, I didn't have anything else to do. And we just busted out laughing. But anyway, Kimberly says that was the launching point. So it did some good for that organization because they're fantastic about getting the information and the correct history of America into the moms in their communities to go and speak in the school board situations and to teach in their communities about really what the Declaration of Independence really says and what the Constitution really says and how we're founded on godly principles. And they took a lot of credit this past weekend for flipping 10 counties in California, just grassroots knocking on doors and getting moms together for meetings. They call them cottage meetings. They do a lot of work for the Republican Party in getting the truth out there. And when I was sent this information that they were going to give me this award, I thought, at Mar-a-Lago, and it's called a Mothers of Influence, and with A.G. Finch, and I thought it was a mistake. I thought this could not have been real, honestly. It was like, this is a huge honor because of everything that they have done the last few years and, of course, where it's going to be. And I just thought, I don't even know, like, if I'm not going to tell anybody about this and not even going to tell my kids because then they're going to have to up in their lives and feel obligated to go. And they're all, raising kids and they have jobs. And Mia said, I cannot wait to come home that Friday. I'll be out for a week. And I'm as soon as I get out of class, I'm going home. And I thought, I'm not going to tell her about this, And anyway, long story short, Reed got it out of me from another angle. And I had to tell him and his jaw dropped. And basically he was like, can we come? I was like, yes, I would love to have you there. Now I have to tell the other kids. And of course, they dropped everything. And that's, to me, is the biggest honor for them to say, Mom, I'm coming to support you. This is amazing.
It kind of fits the brand, though.
But from
why
my
you were going.
perspective,
I mean, it is a Moms for America. They're your kids.
I
They love
know,
you.
but they're grown. And if they were my little kids, I could say, hey, pack up. We're
But
going to
that's
this.
how proud they are of you, Missy.
well, and from my perspective of being a fly on a wall at an event, which is what I was. It was like the people who didn't know me, they were like, oh, you're with her. It's like, yeah.
And the Secret Service were like, check that guy.
Oh, yeah. Surprisingly, a lot of them recognized me. I
They
stood out
love you. They
so
love
much.
us, yeah.
They knew who I was, which was great. It came in handy getting us out of there because they were like, "Now who are y'all?" And he's like, "Oh, I know this guy."
Let me tell the story backstage because
Okay,
this
go.
is what, of course, I'm knocking around in my head because they said the president may be there, he may not be there, whatever. So I'm like, what if he is? What if he's not? What is my speech going to have 3 to 5 minutes? I can't speak in 3 to 5 minutes, but I was going to do my best. Knocking around in my head, what am I going to say to accept an award about being recognized as a mom? And then, of course, our country. And so I worked and worked and worked and worked and got it down. And I'm standing backstage waiting to be called. And the ladies came to me. I could tell something had happened. Chaos started ensuing. And I was a little nervous already because I'm about to be called. And she said, we don't know what to do with you. And I said, okay. And she said, well, he's on his way. He's on his way. So we don't know whether to hold you. We don't know whether to send you. We don't know. We don't know. We don't want to take away your moment. What? And I just put my hand on her arm and I said, do whatever you need to do. I live in a reality show. It's fine. I can handle it. It's not about me. And when I did that, this peace just came over because I thought, God is about to do something and I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And so,
which is usually when he does his best work, when we're not sure where this thing is going.
That's right.
Yeah.
And she just looked at me and she said, okay. And the lady on stage introduced me. And I looked at her and she said, go. I said, okay, here I go. Opened my Bible, did my speech. And then when Jay said, just like he said, Act 17 came up and I saw the movement in the back of the in the back of the hall. And I thought, I can either quit out of respect for him or even more respect for the people here and for the Lord. I can finish my speech because
you were
it's
in
all
a you were in
about
a
God.
bind there, Lisa. Missy, you were in a bind because you had
Well,
scripture and the press, and if you can't abandon the scripture, yeah, that's,
I don't
that's
want- I
hard.
didn't
That's
want
what I
to.
was going to say. As a fly on the wall, my thought was in that moment, because she took it a little differently. She was like, I didn't want people to think I was making the president wait. But I took it like, well, he could have just said, hey, I'm here. Get her off the stage. I mean, I could see Trump saying that.
or then start YMCA because as
All
soon
right.
as I said thank you, that's when the music started.
But he patiently waited. It wasn't but 60 seconds, but still. And he listened.
Yeah.
And out of respect for the word of God and my wife, and I thought that was awesome.
Which again, that goes back to my earlier point. That's why I think he's a man who listens. He's got his issues, but he's a man who will listen. I think in that moment you saw that, and what you said was very important, and that was evidenced by the other people. I do want to say this because we got a guest coming on that we're super excited about. You know, Jase, I felt like you have when Lisa was speaking at the big march for life in Washington, and I'm just there watching up, looking up, and there's 150,000 plus people out here. And she has that 3 to 5 minutes that Missy had. I was in tears just in just godly pride because I was like, this is my wife addressing this audience in a historic moment. And I mean, it does something to you. You're just like, it makes you really proud.
Well, I was going to say, too, that when he walked in and I knew what was happening, again, a peace and a confidence came over me because I was like, and I think I said, now hold on, I said something like,
And you said, hang on, because it was, the room turned into hustle and bustle.
a little bit of, yeah. And I said, hold on, you don't want to miss this. Pay attention. You don't want to miss this. And because I was like getting to the exact time and
you
place.
said this is the most important part.
Yeah. But I asked Cole later, I said, this is my even-keeled child. And I said, what did you think when you knew Trump had walked in and you saw your mom on stage in the middle of a speech? What did you do? And Cole said, I immediately started sweating. So I haven't asked my other kids what they thought, but I was like, even for Cole, it was a moment of what is my mom about to do, you know? So
Look, I want to say this. I know we're introducing our guest, but so Trump gets up there and he says, I was on the 15th tee playing with 3 of the world's greatest golfers. I'm having a great round. I was fixed to finish, and then it hit me. We have the bedrock of America in a group at Mar-a-Lago, and he said, I had to come speak to the moms. You're the bedrock of the country. Everybody, they all went crazy.
and then people lost their minds.
Oh, yeah.
It's standing on tables, chairs.
The
it's
man-
that was the
pushing
transition.
people.
The man knows the moment. All right, we got a very special guest coming up. I see her popping in on the screen here. When we come back from this break, we'll introduce our guest.
Awesome.
Jase, you've been doing a lot of hunting, I imagine. Have you been able to use your cell phone? Have you lost coverage?
Surprisingly, most of the places I go, there's no cell phone coverage. So you have to holler or do smoke signals.
Or you could turn to our sponsor, Patriot Mobile, who for the last 10 years has been America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Patriot Mobile offers dependable nationwide coverage, giving you the ability to access all 3 major networks. So you get the coverage you need, but you don't have to fund the left's agenda. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you're letting everyone know you support free speech, religious freedom, sanctity of life. You also support the Second Amendment, our great military veterans, and first responders. And if that isn't enough, they also have a 100% U.S.-based customer service team that makes switching to Patriot Mobile easy. You can keep your number and your phone, or you can upgrade. They'll help you find the best deal and the best plan for you. Just go to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT. Right now, you get a free month when you use the offer code PHIL. Join us, switch to America's only Christian conservative mobile provider, Patriot Mobile, by going to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT for your free month of service today. Welcome back to Unashamed, and we have our esteemed guest. Now here's what I'm going to say. Y'all can agree or disagree. It's my favorite Blaze host.
Wow.
Out of all the Blaze hosts, you are the best, Allie Beth. We love having you on.
Honor.
You're going
Well,
to get
thank you so much.
Better than Phil? Phil is
better than Phil, better than us.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
She's the
Okay.
best on Blaze. No,
I won't tell them, but thank you. Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank y'all so much.
I think once you're on our podcast for more than 3 times, you're no longer a guest.
she's a
Am
contributor.
I a
now.
co-host?
Yeah, you're a contributor. You're an official Unashamed contributor.
And we
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
and we had your dad on. I remember the red wagon, the little red
Little
wagon.
red
He
wagon.
wrote the
Yes,
That's
that
right.
is that's right. I don't know how many like dad-daughter combos y'all have had on the show.
You're the first and only.
Yeah.
book. I think
And your
Wow.
dad and I are friends now. You know, we text at least probably every other month.
I know.
Figure
I
out
love
where we're
that.
at.
And Al, you came on our marriage special too, which
We
was
did.
really amazing.
We did. It was somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Texas. That's all I
It
remember.
was.
I remember driving out in the middle of nowhere. I thought, are we doing a podcast out here? I felt like I was going to a bar.
We wanted you to feel at home.
Well, you know what? You know what led me to think about that? Because I read the first chapter of her book, and I thought I have to stop right here.
So
'Cause
you
I'm
only
gonna-
read one chapter.
Well, there's a story behind
Okay.
that, and it's a good story, and I think my wife is.
Allie Beth, this
No,
sounds like
I
an excuse
remember.
coming
I
out.
remember.
I'm ready.
And I thought, boy, now her dad wrote a book, The Little Red Wagon, or what was the name of it? The stories from the
Life lessons from
Life-
the Little Red Wagon.
Life
Yes.
Lessons, and now his daughter has toxic empathy,
Yeah.
and my vocabulary is never been what it should be. All of our
That's
listeners.
why we're trying to get Zach to
So I
tutor
see
him.
I see some kind of demonic being stirring this 55-gallon drum, and I was like, boy, we got the Little Red Wagon.
which is
Now
very
we-
easy to read.
Yeah. And so the only reason I only read one chapter is because I thought that was so good, I'm going to have to read that again before I continue.
Allie Beth, if you had only named it C Spot Run.
Yeah. That'll be my next one. I'll do that version of toxic empathy. Only
Oh,
one
man.
syllable words next time.
So to finish my long story that's way too long, the reason I only read one chapter because I thought I got to meditate on this because I thought it was awesome. And
Well,
then you saw the book and said, "Oh, I'm going to take this with me to Nashville." So
I
that's
did.
what she read the entire book because it was with her in Nashville and we only had one copy.
So, Allie Beth, I heard you on the Megyn Kelly podcast talking
Yes.
about this. And so I think, Jace, we were in the car traveling to Nashville one time and we heard you on her podcast. And I was like, this sounds amazing and exactly what we as Christians, it's almost like a tool set that we need. And so I'm so glad that you sent us the book because I was going to order it anyway. But thank you.
Well,
And
thank
it is
you.
amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I like to think, contrary to what Jay said, I like to think that it actually is easy to read. They're heavy subjects,
Yes.
but I wanted
Yeah.
to break it down. We talk about abortion, we talk about gender, we talk about all the big ones, social justice, immigration, the definition of marriage. And I wanted it to be, like you said, tools that people could put in their tool belts, not only as they are thinking through their own Christian worldview and what the Bible has to say about these issues, but also to equip them to talk about these very sensitive, personal, in some cases, identity-centric issues with those in their lives who might disagree with them. So that's what this book is for.
Well, the revelation I had on that, all jokes aside, was that I've always felt like us as Christians had an articulation problem in these issues, but I never realized that some of that problem is created by the people representing these issues by these little statements that sound great. When I
Good
first
point.
heard the phrase Planned Parenthood, I thought, oh, that's a great concept. You need to plan on being a parent. Well, I later found out that was nothing. It's nothing about what I thought it was. And they tend to do that, and you point that out in the book over and over. There's little phrases.
Euphemisms,
Yeah, that come
Exactly.
up that appeal to you empathizing with humanity.
Well, even birth control. I would love for you to explain that in a little soundbite about how we even came up with that phrase, how that took off birth control.
Yeah, so that term, birth control, was actually a PR choice, a public relations choice by people like Margaret Sanger. Most people, if they know the name Margaret Sanger, they know her as the founder of Planned Parenthood. She believed lots of evil things, as you can imagine. She was someone who spearheaded eugenics in the United States, which of course means selectively breeding people that she would say are worthy to be bred, so worthy to reproduce. She would say that people who count as imbeciles or people of certain skin colors or different backgrounds or poor socioeconomic status, that those people just shouldn't reproduce. And so she created this contraceptive, or she helped create a contraceptive that would stop people from being able to reproduce, and not just anyone, but in particular, people who were on the lower rungs of society. And because abortion and eugenics really weren't well received in the United States, especially after the travesty of the Holocaust, she had to change the name. Not only change the name of Planned Parenthood, it actually was the Birth Control League. She had to change the name of that, but she also had to change the name of contraceptive and how she talked about these medications that were to stop women from getting pregnant. And so birth control, I guess, was kind of more palatable to the public at the time, who really didn't understand what these pills actually do.
Mm-hmm.
No, and you did such a good job of painting that picture, because throughout the entire book, in a range of topics, which hit all these. Let me ask you this, Allie, just as a definition of terms, because early in the book, you talk about empathy itself, because the book title is Toxic Empathy, How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. And we kind of jumped right into the abortion part of it. Talk about how empathy is a good thing, but then how that's been twisted into your narrative of becoming toxic empathy. What does that look like?
Yes. So I would say that empathy in itself is actually neutral. It's neither good nor bad. Empathy means to feel what someone feels. So it's not just feeling badly for someone. It's not even just having compassion for someone. Compassion, if you break it down, with suffering. So you're suffering with someone. But empathy is to feel how someone else feels. Now, that can lead towards something that's good, like love, like kindness, like selflessness or generosity, or it can lead you in a toxic direction. So I give an example of how empathy can lead you in a good, selfless direction. I tell a story of being in the airport. I was traveling by myself and I saw a mom who was with her toddler, and she was trying to get her carry-on and break down her stroller and also hold on to her baby and get down to her seat. And I just saw in her face the panic and the stress that was so familiar to me, because I had been there before. It was just a couple weeks earlier that I was doing the exact same thing with my toddler. And now, before kids, I'm not sure I would have noticed this woman. Maybe I would have had some awful selfish thoughts like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired of crying babies on an airplane. But now I never have those thoughts, because the crying babies have been mine and I have been there. And so I knew exactly what she needed in that moment, because I could feel how she felt. It wasn't just sympathy. It wasn't only compassion. I actually felt what she felt. And so I immediately knew that I needed to carry her bag onto the plane, and someone had done that for me. And I remember when someone did that for me when I was traveling alone with my child, she said, I'm a mom. I've been there. And so there is power in being able to put yourself in someone's shoes because you've shared an experience with them or because you can imagine sharing an experience with them. But empathy can lead you in the other direction, what I would call a toxic direction, when it causes you to do a few things, when it causes you to validate something that is not true, when it encourages you to affirm sin, and then when it encourages you to support policies that are destructive, either to that person or to the people around them. And there are examples of this. Of course, that's what the chapters are dedicated to. We see toxic empathy when it comes to abortion, when it comes to gender, when it comes to the definition of marriage, even immigration and social justice, although that's kind of a different category. And so that's what this is about, how a toxic form of empathy has led us to affirm sin and to support policies that sound compassionate, but in the end are actually really bad for the people that we're trying to help and everyone around them.
And it's easy to weaponize empathy as well. I read a book years ago, Allie, Failure of Nerve, Leadership in the Age of a Quick Fix, which is like one of my core books. Mm-hmm. And the author, I think his name, Dr. Friedman, he makes this point about empathy being a word that actually wasn't even in the English language. And I'm probably going to butcher this, but I think it was like 1929 or 20. It's in the 20s.
Yeah.
And his point was that this is a word that was introduced into the English language, and it should not be conflated with the word sympathy. And he pretty much the whole thrust of the book, which I would say also Coddling of the American Mind is another book that's kind of written with the same idea that we've used empathy as a way to sabotage leadership and to sabotage advancement and to sabotage healthy organizations. And so when I read that book, for me, it's very provocative. The title's provocative, right? Toxic empathy. But even to critique the word empathy because it is held in such high esteem in American culture, we can't even critique it. But when I read Friedman's work, I was like, and I went through the whole process of his book, I was like, wow, this is actually, I've seen this happen in my own family and in my own systems. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. And people might not know this. I don't think that I've talked about this publicly, but Zach actually recommended that book to me back when this book was just an idea. I hadn't even started writing it yet, but I was talking to Zach, I think maybe the last time that I was on in person with you guys, and he recommended this book and I bought it, and it was actually very formative and helpful in writing this, because I also really hadn't heard people critique empathy, but I started noticing how people were using empathy kind of like as a mallet to hurt their enemies or people on the other side of the political aisle. Back in 2020, everything was lead with empathy, vote with empathy, base your policies on empathy, when that's a horrible, horrible idea, because there are people on both sides of every issue that demand our empathy, that have really sad stories that could say my feelings, my experience, my stated identity demand that you affirm this, that you support this policy. And if you don't, well, then you hate me. And if that's how you're leading, then you're going to be really confused. You're going to make really bad emotions-based decisions. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about people's stories and how they feel and listen to them. But at the end of the day, and this is kind of like the thrust of my book, Christians are not called primarily to empathy. We are called to the truth in love. And love, as is defined by the God who is love, 1 John 4:8, never rejoices in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth, 1 Corinthians 13:6. So if we love someone, that is going to be inextricably intertwined with what is true. Telling someone the truth about abortion, the truth about gender, the truth about sexuality, whatever it is, in a gentle but bold way, is actually the most loving thing we can do, not affirming them when they're believing a lie.
Zach, you're still holding on to mine and Jace's gold backs?
And with every day that passes, they increase in value, boys. So just know that they're in safe hands.
Really?
I'm telling you, that was
Zach is now one of our new insurance policies. He's holding our gold backs.
Makes me feel
they're literally
warm
worth
and
about $550 as of today.
Awesome. So what Zach is talking about is Alpine Gold Exchange. They have something called the Goldback. It's the world's first physical, interchangeable gold money that is designed to accommodate even small transactions. Goldbacks do not need someone else's approval to spend. They don't specify where they can be spent or what they can be spent on. They're anonymous, so no one needs to know who you are to spend them. For the first time in human history, you can spend physical gold on small transactions like a burger, or you can use that same money for large transactions like remodeling your home. This solves the 2,600-year small coin problem with spending gold. At Alpine Gold, you can start earning a competitive return on precious metal leases that allow investors to protect against inflation while earning a competitive return at the same time. You won't find many similar offers. Every other precious metal IRA is lacking this. That's why Alpine Gold offers gold leases that pay you in gold. Everyone is eligible to start with returns up to 3.5% annually. Alpine Gold now offers members the ability to enroll in their lease program directly on the UPMA account portal for gold coins, goldbacks, and silver. When you buy 100 goldbacks and lease them, Alpine Gold Exchange will give you 5 goldbacks for your first lease payment. Payments occur 1 month after your lease begins. Limit 1 payment per person. Also, when you buy $1,000 of goldbacks, they will waive all credit card fees, which saves you 3.5%, whether it's in their e-commerce store or the vaulted accounts. Now is a great time to get goldbacks at a lower price. Learn more about goldbacks by visiting alpinegold.com. Use the promo code Unashamed to receive free shipping on orders over $200. That's alpinegold.com. Use the promo code Unashamed. You talked about, Allie, the red flags, which we mentioned, euphemisms, which Jase mentioned, emotional language, which is another thing you just described. The arguments become so emotional so fast that we throw out truth, that we throw out facts, that we throw out the things that are there important for us to look at. And then exploitative politics, which, of course, is such a driving force in the topics that you chose to talk about, which are the big ones, right? We started talking about abortion, so let me talk a little bit more about that and the idea of birth control, as Missy brought up. You talk about in the book the perspective. Everything that's talked about in the political side is all about from a woman's perspective, but you mentioned the perspective of a child, which is what we're talking about here, which gets ignored right in the conversation, especially at the national level. So talk a little bit about that, what it's like to view the perspective of a baby and being involved in this story.
Yeah, that is a hallmark, a character trait of toxic empathy. I say that it blinds you to reality and morality. And how it does that is that it hoists up only one particular victim and it ignores the people on the other side of the moral equation. And so I started every chapter actually with a story that is really from the progressive perspective, so that by the end of that story, you might think, wow, maybe I am pro-choice, or maybe I am pro-gender ideology, whatever it is, just to kind of show the reader this is what it looks like and this is how your heartstrings are pulled on. So in that abortion chapter, I start with a real story that was originally reported by NPR of a woman named Samantha. Very poor. She already had several children. She finds out she's pregnant at the 20-week ultrasound. This baby is diagnosed with a life-limiting fetal anomaly, and she wants an abortion. In Texas, you cannot abort your child just because he or she has special needs. And so NPR tells this story as if this is a tragedy for the mother, that she had to go through with pregnancy. She had to go through with labor and delivery. She had to hold this baby in her arms. She had to pay for this funeral. She had to ignore the needs of her other children while she was in labor, so that at the end of it, the reader is supposed to think, wow, these pro-life laws are awful. They're so draconian. I can't imagine going through this, or how could they put this poor woman through this kind of thing? But as Christians, because we're responsible to the truth and because we care about image bearers of God, we care about Samantha, but we also care about her little baby Halo, we have to think harder. We have to say, but what about the baby? that's really the question in every conversation about abortion. But what about the baby? And so I give a very graphic, detailed description of what would have happened if abortion had been legal in Texas, if she had been able to abort her child at 20 plus weeks. They would have injected her heart with the same chemical combination that is used to kill death row murderers. And so they would have given that baby the death penalty until she had a heart attack, died inside the womb. They would have had to dismember her with forceps before removing her. They would have discarded her like toxic waste. And I could even get into more gruesome details, but that's what abortion is at that stage of pregnancy. It's always brutal, but the bigger the baby gets, the more painful it is, the more difficult it is, the harder it is for the mother. And instead, this baby was born whole. She was given a name. She was held by her mother and father. She was told that she was loved. Of course, that's the better alternative. Poisoning this child, murdering this child, throwing her away like garbage is not actually the more compassionate and loving alternative. And so that's kind of what that chapter is dedicated to, making sure that we are looking at the people on the other side of the moral equation, the people that the media try really hard to hide.
Which is why knowledge is so important for people to know that, because if you only go off the euphemisms and just the emotional part of, only looking at it from that one perspective, you're never going to understand that. You made another point in the abortion chapter, which really resonated to Lisa and I, because Lisa is post-abortive. And so she has lived with that, and she shares that with audiences, and we connect with people everywhere. And you make the point. It's seemingly it's put out there that this will never affect you emotionally and you'll never carry the baggage of this. That is simply not true. And we see it over and over and over again. So once again, something that seems like an easy argument is not, because once you put the truth into it and the results of it, of course, it impacts people in a powerful way. So I thought you did a really good job of laying that out.
I'm going to jump in for a second, because when you were talking about empathy and how people we're encouraged to lead with empathy, it made me think of the famous quote recently of Kamala Harris saying in her Jamaican accent, "Have you no empathy, man?" And I thought, the funny part of that is that, she was having an accent. But the horrible part of it is what you were saying is that, oh, nope, that should end the discussion of truth. When I say empathy, you're supposed to bow and say, oh, I'm so sorry. I should have more empathy. But there's no truth in that.
Well, the goal of leadership, if you think about it, the word empathy, when I hear it, I think about, I've always heard it proposed like this, that it's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so I imagine like this hole that somebody falls into and they're stuck in the hole. And if I have empathy and I'm a leader, then I'm going to walk by this deep, 12-foot hole that they're stuck in. I'm going to see them at the bottom. And if I'm going to have empathy, I need to get into the hole with them and hold them and make them feel better and comfort them. Right. But, and that is very kind, but at the same time, now I'm in the hole. I'm like, now we're both in the hole and we're looking up like, oh no, but we can hold each other.
Yeah. Good point.
Leadership is, and Friedman makes this point, it's actually the role of leadership is to maximize one's threshold for pain. And so sometimes it's pushing people through the pain. If you're leading somebody on a football team, you're not coddling them. You're like, push it. Yeah, you may throw up from running sprints, but guess what? When we get into the game next time, you guys you're not going to be sucking wind. And so it's not to get in the hole. It's to drop the ladder down, to go find help, to bring up, to pull somebody out. And I think that's the big difference of like empathy. When you divorce it from truth and you just get in their shoes, well, then you're not able to help anybody out of anything. And we need to help each other out.
Definitely. When it comes to abortion too, the way that this kind of manifests itself, especially during the election, is that we saw, this is another hallmark, I would say, maybe of progressive propaganda, but it definitely overlaps with toxic empathy, is the conflation of abortion and miscarriage, pretending like we don't know these things. And so you would see these horrible stories of these women who had miscarriages, and the propaganda says that these pro-life laws don't allow women to get miscarriage care, which is just not true. You could go story by story and actually debunk that. That's just not the case. That's not what happened in these terrible stories. But as soon as you say, hey, I got to fact check this for you, or I got to tell you why this is not true, you get the retort, well, just show some empathy. And the assumption is that empathy means to just affirm someone's story or to affirm someone's experience or to get in the hole with them and say that's sad and end it there. But that is not the obligation that we have. And another analogy that I think of, like if your child comes down to your room at night and says, there's a monster in the corner of my room, you could, in empathy, say, yeah, that is really scary. That 100% is a monster. I'm so sorry. I'm really scared too. Okay, you could do that. Your 5-year-old is not going to get better though. Or you could go upstairs and you could turn the light on and you could say, no, that's just a pile of clothes. That's not a monster. Which is the more loving thing to do? One may be less empathetic, but the latter is certainly more loving because it is truthful.
Before I want to talk a little bit about, because we can't obviously cover all of them. We want folks to get the book. Abortion is healthcare is one of the lies. Trans women are women was the second lie that you addressed. Love is love, which deals with homosexuality, is the third. And then I want to talk about this, no human is illegal, because I love the way, and you did this, Allie Beth, in such a good way in all the chapters, because you personally said, look, I have empathy for these different stories that you began with. And you talked about that struggle. And so it's the same when it comes to immigration, because all of us have empathy for people wanting a better life for themselves and their families and to be in America. But talk a little bit about that, how because to me, that's such a big one right now in terms of where we are, what just happened in election, and kind of how that, what's happened, how that's been hijacked and turned into toxic empathy.
Yeah, so this was a chapter that surprised me. I would say that I focus on the first 3 subjects that I wrote about in the book a lot more because those are creation order issues. And so I just talk about them a lot more. I do talk about immigration, but I was surprised by my own research. I was surprised about how passionate I got as I was writing this. There's certainly people on both sides of this issue that have difficult stories that demand our empathy. We start with a woman named Maribel who immigrated here with her family from Mexico. She ended up being deported under Donald Trump, according to USA Today, separated from her family. As a mother, like, her story makes me really sad that she was separated from her children. That's very often what happens in deportation, whether it's Donald Trump or any other president who does the deporting. And so, of course, USA Today and the media, they only highlight those stories. And those are the stories that come to mind when we think about deportation or when we think about enforcing border laws, those sad stories. But the media very often doesn't highlight the other side of illegal immigration. So it was mostly conservative media that covered the horrific murder of Laken Riley. Kate Steinle, 2015, she was 32 years old, walking down a pier with her dad on a Sunday afternoon, shot in the back by an illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times, jailed for violent crimes, but was being shielded by San Francisco's sanctuary city policies. Her dad held her in his arms. She said, "Help me, Daddy." And then she breathed her last breath and died. Molly Tibbetts. There are so many stories just like this. And the difference between a crime committed by an illegal immigrant and a crime committed by a citizen is that every crime committed by an illegal immigrant is actually preventable. And so when we have people on both sides of the issue that may demand our empathy, the question we have to ask is, but what is right? It can't just be who has the saddest story or how many sad stories do we have on both sides of an issue, but what is actually true and what is right. And so we go through the statistics and some of the numbers of really the cost, the human cost, economic cost of illegal immigration. But then we also look at it from a principled and a biblical perspective that God created nations. He created borders. He created laws. He created the ideas of government. The government was instituted by God to punish evil and to reward good. That's Romans 13. Cultures were God's idea. God is a God of order. We see that from the very beginning. He places us in a garden, not in a jungle. We see that he has a process of doing things. He has protections for his people everywhere a wall is depicted literally or metaphorically throughout scripture is a signal of goodness, is a signal of protection, of provision, of safety for God's people. And so I think that we see really strong examples of the importance of a nation's sovereignty in scripture. And at the end of the day, no matter how many sad stories are on either side, I think it is righteous of a government to protect its borders and to put the well-being of its citizens first, whether that's the United States or Zimbabwe or India. I think every government has that right and responsibility.
Amen.
No, that's really good. And you even talked about some of the European countries that have basically gone through this same process and are going through it now. And talk a little bit about that. That hasn't worked out so well in these European countries in terms of just saying we have no borders so everybody can come in.
Yes, Western civilization is dealing with a lot of Western guilt, this belief that because of colonialism of the past, that in order to basically pay reparations for that, they have to have open borders and kind of be recolonized themselves. I saw a stat the other day that there are more Indian immigrants who own land in London than native-born Brits. And I'm not against legal immigration, but of course, there are going to be different outcomes and consequences to allowing the demographics of your country to change very dramatically in a short period of time. Some of that is legal immigration, but a lot of that is illegal immigration, or allowing legal immigration to be way too easy to the detriment of your own country. Of course, everyone should have a right and responsibility to accept people into their country that love their country and who share their values and who want to assimilate and abide by the ideals that have made each nation great. Unfortunately, in Europe, and this is so politically incorrect to talk about, but whether you're looking at Norway or Sweden or England, what we see is that sexual assault has skyrocketed, including the sexual assault of children. And it is the vast majority of those cases are perpetrated by the immigrant residents there, namely from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from Iran. These are mostly Middle Eastern men who are coming not as refugees or asylum seekers, but they just want to be there. Many of them are also from Africa. And of course, that's not saying that all immigrants are committing crimes or that all people from those places are criminals. But that's the fact. And actually, we have people of all different kinds of backgrounds, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She is a Black woman, a former Muslim herself, who has written about this, these roving rapist gangs, Middle Eastern men who walk throughout the streets of places like Britain and they find young girls to rape. This is not an isolated instance. This is a huge systemic problem in places like Sweden and Germany. And so this is, I think, one of the gravest and most unjust consequences of toxic empathy.
No, you're exactly right. And you're right. It's so underreported because it doesn't fit the narrative of the other side of the argument. I just read an article, I think it was almost 70% of sexual assaults now on German trains are by illegal immigrants. And so, again, these are just facts that are coming out as you're reading about them.
One thing that I thought really stood out to me in that chapter was when you talked about how past presidents and vice presidents and even senators were all on the same page about illegal immigration. Everyone was against it. It's not true. We love immigration, come through legally, blah, 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 until 2015. When Trump said, I'm going to build the wall. And I told, Jason and I were talking about this last night. And I said, this is, my theory for a while now, but the left has wanted to sustain this power for so long. And they saw this magnanimous celebrity come in. They thought, there's just no way that we're going to be able to counteract him. He's going to win. So we have to make him the devil. And they started little by little, with the racism, with the wall, everything that came out of Trump's mouth, we had to question because, he's not a perfect man. He's done things in his life. And as Christians, it's like, I really wish he wouldn't have done that, And so it makes us feel maybe guilty that we are supporting a man that really lines up in his policies with what you're talking about, order and protection for all of God's people. And so I just thought, this is how this is happening. This is why it's become so divisive and so toxic, is because of really one man coming and saying, no, we're not doing this anymore, and drawing the line. And we had to choose a side. And it took a few years, but we did it. It was a mandate. And I'm hoping that all of this nonsense is just going to fall away, although they're going to try really, really hard not to let that happen. But it just seems so common sense now that these laws are there for a reason, and for order and for protection.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it really, as you mentioned, it wasn't very long ago that people like Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton were all saying, we've got to do something about illegal immigration. We've got to crack down on what's happening at the border. It was Bill Clinton who deported more illegal immigrants than any other president. Barack Obama, in just 4 years of his presidency, actually deported more illegal immigrants than Donald Trump did in his 4 years. And Joe Biden actually wasn't that far behind. The problem, of course, with the Biden administration is that they totally opened up the border. But strangely enough, he did deport, I think it was over 1 million illegal immigrants. And so it's very odd. I think that you're exactly right. They've got to find something to make it look like Donald Trump is this evil fascist guy, when I guess that means that they were evil fascist Hitlers just a few years ago, too. It is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So tell us, we just have a little bit of time left, but tell us, kind of what you hope folks can get from the book. My personal takeaway was, it's up to us to speak truth in love. We can do this from a biblical perspective. You did it, and we can still be Christ-like to people and love people, and yet be truthful, because trying to help them out of that hole, to Zach's illustration. So what do you hope folks get from the book? And also tell our audience where they can find it.
Yes, my hope is that the next time you encounter this kind of emotional manipulation that tells you, if you don't use this person's preferred pronouns, then they're going to commit suicide or you're an awful person. The next time you hear, if you don't believe in redefining marriage, you're a bigot because you don't want this person to be happy, or whatever lie it is that you're confronted with, especially if it is a catastrophic event like COVID or something like George Floyd happens again, God forbid. I want Christians to be prepared, because there is going to be a lot of propaganda coming up, especially on this immigration issue. When the Trump administration starts to deport people, the only thing you are going to hear is how this is not Christ-like, this is not Christian, this is not compassionate, you cannot be a real Christian. And they will find the saddest stories that they possibly can to try to get you to be against deportations in general, or against any kind of law enforcement when it comes to immigration. And the Christian, because our instinct is compassion, as it should be. Our instinct is to love. Our instinct is to feel. That's okay. But I want us to stop. I want us to take a beat. I want us to check our emotions and to say, but what is actually true? What is factually true? What is scientifically true in some cases? What is biblically true? And to be slower to respond, not allow our outreach or our outrage or our compassion to be dictated by social media trends. But I also want this book to equip Christians. They read it, they've got the facts, they've got the background, the history of things like abortion. They feel fully equipped to have that conversation, but to be able to speak the truth in love in a way that is persuasive. Yes, this book is a guidebook, but it was also meant to persuade Christians. I wanted to make the case to Christians that the progressive perspective on these issues are bad, are harmful, are wrong. Here's why, and here's how you can tell other people why. So that's the point of the book, and I love hearing from people that it's helped them in that way. Praise God, and I just hope it continues to do so. You can get it wherever books are sold. I know it's at Barnes & Noble. I think it should be at Hobby Lobby, but of course you can get it on Amazon, and go to toxicempathy.com. You'll find all the places where it's sold.
I said you are our favorite Blaze host. You were one of our more articulate
Yes.
Christian spokesman,
Yes,
and we
yes.
appreciate
Well,
what you
thank
do.
you.
And it's not just the book. Check her out on Relatable as well. Toxic Empathy.
Thank you for your boldness too.
Yes.
Thank you for your courage.
Well, y'all too. And thank you so much. I'm so glad to have people like you in this fight. It makes me feel a lot better.
Same with us. All right. We'll see
Thank
you next
you,
time,
Allie.
Allie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.